Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. We are eagerly anticipating a brand new case, and it is the Nicholas Godejohn case. He is on trial for allegedly stabbing the mother of his girlfriend. That's right, you heard me. This is a really interesting case that's captured the media's attention. He faces first-degree murder and armed critical action charges. And Dee Dee, who's the mother, was found at her home, stabbed to death, a brutal crime. And this is where things take an interesting turn. Gypsy Blanchard, the daughter of Dee Dee, was allegedly the mastermind behind this plot and wanted to kill her mother because she claimed that she was the victim of child abuse for years, that her mother suffered from an interesting syndrome called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which she basically imprisoned her daughter through fake illnesses and injuries, claiming that she suffered from all of these different conditions when she really didn't, and that Gypsy wanted to break free, and that she enlisted the help of her boyfriend to ultimately kill her. Yeah, the details of this are pretty bizarre and very tragic, but we can't talk about this case without also discussing what the possible defense is. And it appears that what's going to be happening in this case is Godejohn's attorneys plan to argue that he is autistic, which affects his ability to make decisions. The defense attorney actually said that the autism spectrum disorder interferes with a person's ability to envision consequences and think ahead. And the judge will actually rule if a medical expert will be allowed to testify about this condition. So we want to discuss a little bit more about this autism aspect. And joining me right now are two very special guests. First up, juvenile court judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott, but also a very familiar face here on the network and also on our message boards. You may know her as Addie out on the message boards, but that's right, our Law and Crime digital video producer, Ashton Schwinn, is with us. And Addie, I'm so happy you're joining us because, first of all, if you could just explain to our viewers, you know about the autism spectrum and can speak a little bit more about this.
Yes, I was diagnosed as an adult after finding out that my two sons, especially my youngest, when he got a diagnosis, they turned around and looked at the entire family to see. And it turns out that myself and my oldest son and my youngest son are both on the spectrum. And we sit at different parts on the spectrum. The spectrum's wide, as everyone knows. My son is a little bit further up on the spectrum than I am, and my oldest son kind of falls a little bit below, but we are more what they used to call Asperger's, but they now call it, autism spectrum disorder.
Right, and the idea that the defense attorneys are saying that autism, it can interfere with a person's ability to envision the consequences and think ahead, because we believe that Nicholas Godejohn is claiming that he was manipulated by Gypsy. And so I'm curious from your perspective, is that true, what they said?
That is absolutely true. I am not a fan of strategy games because I cannot think ahead more than a step. So I love chess, can't play it. Drive my husband nuts trying to play strategy games, and my sons are somewhat the same. They choose their games according to how they can do it strategy-wise and think ahead and that kind of thing. So that's, yes, it is. I absolutely agree that after listening to Godejohn's testimony and stuff, that I feel that he is or was or could be easily manipulated, gullible, lots of good words to use, that I know those words well.
Well, let's see who he claims was manipulating him. We have the Facebook messages. In case you haven't seen this, when Dee Dee was stabbed, all of a sudden there was a Facebook message written on the account that she shared with Gypsy. Read it yourself. We have another one. Take a look. Gypsy later admitted to writing these messages right after apparently Nicholas Godejohn allegedly stabbed Dee Dee. I mean, you're reading these words, and you know this is going to come in trial where Nicholas is going to say, I was manipulated by this very person. So before we play you some of his jailhouse interview, I want to get the quick perspective from Ashley Willcott. A successful defense here that he was on the spectrum and manipulated by this young girl who she herself was manipulated by her mother. Is that a viable defense?
Well, first of all, I love that Addie was willing to come on and share with us because it gives us insight into autism. Second of all, to me, the defense hinges directly on the medical expert and whether or not the court allows them to testify. And here's the reason, Jesse. If you look up online the definition of an autism, it does say that it affects a person's ability to communicate and interact with others. Whether or not that rises to the level of interfering with his ability to envision the consequences is something that, in my opinion, an expert would need to speak to meet that legal burden.
Let's play a little bit of Nicholas Godejohn in case nobody has heard him speak or talk about this case. This was his jailhouse interview, and in case you haven't seen it, this is really crucial. Take a look. Okay, I want to get the reaction right now from Addie. Addie, you're listening to the defendant in his jailhouse interview, explaining everything about his role there, explaining also how he came to realize that Gypsy really wasn't suffering from these conditions that her mother claimed she was suffering from. I'm just curious your reaction to watching him in that jailhouse interview.
I felt that I watched it last night, the full thing, and I absolutely feel that he felt that he had to step in and help her out of a situation, and that he saw her as somebody being hurt by somebody else, and he needed to take care of that situation. And with his capacity, he was pretty much open because of the manipulation thing, that he was able to, or that he was willing to do whatever it took to help her out. At first, I think he wanted to run away with her, but that just, I don't think that was something that was in her mind, something that was a possibility or something that should have happened. But I think that he definitely was easily manipulated in that situation.
You know, Addie, the autism, the spectrum, it's constantly in the media. It's being portrayed in a lot of different, I've seen it in television shows and films, and now we're covering a case that's going to center on it a lot. I'm curious from your perspective, do you think there's a misconception out there that people seem to get wrong about this, that people seem to make assumptions that are incorrect? I mean, what would you like for people to know out there about this condition, and especially maybe how it relates to this trial?
I have a very hard time when I hear autism called a mental illness. It is a neurological disorder. And yes, there are aspects of autism that can be a part of mental illness, but it, and in and of itself, is a disorder that affects the nerves and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about someone's smarts, where they, you know, like if are they intelligent? Can they? There's certain things that I have a very hard time with. There are other things that I excel in, especially if I am obsessed with it, which is a common thing. But the misconception is that it is a mental illness, and that give a person with autism a chance to just be themselves, and don't try to stop them from being or doing whatever it is they're doing, especially with the things we do if we're rocking or whatever. Just let that be that person and be a part of that person. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense, and I'm happy you said that because, you know, one of the things that we do here on Law and Crime is we're presenting the reality of these situations. This isn't made up. This isn't a movie. This is real life, and we're happy to show this and explain a little bit more about it. Ashley Willcott is with us again, and Ashley, you had talked a little bit about with me about some of the statements that Wendy Dickinson was making earlier, and one of the things that we talked about in the break was the idea of whether or not the Gypsy was the victim here, and how much she knew about her condition, what she really suffered from, and whether or not she was a manipulator. I'm curious about your perspective with Gypsy, because she really is put in a very strange position herself.
Right, and so I differ from what Wendy said on air, and the reason I differ is this. I, as a judge, see abuse and neglect cases every single day that I'm on the bench, and the reality is when a child's been victimized and is the victim of abuse and neglect, it can change even their brain chemistry depending on the amount of trauma. So if it is correct that she was abused by this mother because the mother was making up medical conditions, starting with as an infant having seizure all the way through her life, it affects her in such a way that I don't think you can attribute to her participating with her mother willingly. Maybe she knew she could walk and that she wasn't because her mother said you need to be in a wheelchair, but you can't blame the child. You can't blame an 11, 12, 13-year-old for participating in that kind of quote-unquote scheme, because a child does what a parent does. They have an inherent trust that the parent is telling them the right thing and that they're supposed to do what a parent is telling them, and they can even be fearful for not doing what a parent is telling them. So I just can't blame her in this case, but I also recognize that with the autism diagnosis, the defendant in this case is in a different position and can easily be manipulated. And God, I love you, Addie, for educating all of us about autism, because that's important.
Yeah, it really is, and this is a strange set of details. It really is, and we are going to be live in that courtroom tomorrow to cover every aspect of this case. So we have to take a quick break, but before we do, I just want to thank Addie. Thanks so much for coming on. You do a great job, especially on our chat board. All of our chatters love you, Addie, so thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it, and bringing and shedding some light onto this.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, Ashley, I need you to stand by, because when we come back, we're going to talk about the Armando Baptista case, another trial that we will be live in tomorrow. And we are previewing these cases because in case you missed some of the interesting details, we're going to cover it for you here on Law and Crime. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.